Hello and welcome. Thank you all for joining us today. I am Nick Kanoki, Director of Technology for the Asset Leadership Network, and I am very excited for today's City and Places Asset Leadership Board Roundtable. As you can see, we have a variety of panelists. I won't name them all now, but we'll get into that in just a moment. Before we get underway, I want to thank our Platinum organizational member, Onuma System, and Kimon Onuma for his continued participation in the ALN. As well as our patron members and all our organizational members. Thank you for making what we do here at the ALN possible. And if you're interested in working with the ALN, please reach out and we can talk about how we can work together to achieve our missions.
I am very happy to be facilitating a discussion among the ALN Cities and Places Asset Leadership Board. And with us today, we have Claude Tankersley, co-chair of the board. And thank you, Cecilia, for saying you appreciate us getting us started. And Jennifer Mims from Jacobs. Claude is operations director for the city of St. Petersburg, Florida. Jennifer is the director of asset management, also from Jacobs. We have Stephen Zoegall, who is the global market lead for City and Places. He's vice president at Jacobs also. And Earl Jackson from City of Denver, where he is the CFO for the Transportation and Infrastructure Department, where you're also deputy manager. Is that correct, Earl?
That is correct.
And we have Jim Dieter, CEO of the ALN, who is also with Jacobs as the senior expert asset management consultant. I think I have all the right words, but I'm not sure if I have them in order. And what we're going to be doing today is talking about the concept of value for a government. And it's a very different concept than for an organization. And we're going to have Jennifer Mims give us a start. So Jennifer, thank you for your patience as we got that taken care of.
Thank you, Michael, as well as Jim. I just do want to start off by thanking the Asset Leadership Network for establishing this forum and this opportunity for us all to connect. I know there's several of us here today live, and then I think this will be posted, for people to reference as a source down the line. So I'm super excited about this. I've been with Jacobs for just over 9 years now, and Jacobs is mostly known as this large A&E firm, and we do a lot of work in that engineering and architectural space. Another part of our group is consulting and advisory, and that happens to be the space that I have been in. So it's a much smaller, less known part of Jacobs, but small and mighty and growing fast. So I've been in the strategic asset management space as long as I've been with Jacobs, and worked with lots of different clients. My background is aviation, but I work across all cities, or all markets, I should say, including cities and places. And I'm really thrilled about this opportunity because regardless of the industry or the client, when our team gets in there and starts doing consulting, clients always want to know, well, what are other organizations doing in this space? And what are best practices? And are we sort of better or worse than them, or really further along the maturity continuum than them would be the more diplomatic way to say it. But it's a constant question that we get, and there's such strong value in that benchmarking and best practices, regardless of the industry. So I'm super thrilled about this opportunity that ALN has set up this board to help facilitate this dialogue across the team, and also grateful for Claude to be co-chairing this with me. So the city of St. Pete is a new client of ours. I guess we're about a year in, huh, Claude? So I'm really excited about the work that they're doing. Claude claims not to be an expert in asset management, but when you hear him speak, he has all the sort of skills and the right attitude and vision, and he is more of an expert than he acknowledges himself to be. So just really happy to be a part of this. Thank you, everybody, for chiming in, and I will turn it over to Steven. So Steve Zoegall, as Mike mentioned, is the Vice President of our Cities and Places market. So within Jacobs, we have services that we offer, but we also put a very strong emphasis on key markets, and Cities and Places is one of them, which Steve is helping us to lead. So I just wanted to give him a few minutes to really touch on why this is such an important market for Jacobs as a whole. So Steve, take it away.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. So hey, everybody. So Steve Zoegall, I'm leading up, as Jen mentioned, Cities and Places for Jacobs. I most recently came from Accenture, where I was leading a kind of a similar team around cities, transportation, and infrastructure. I'm this week, actually today, at the Scale Global Summit, which is my first time here. The first time I've ever shared a platform with Hillary Clinton, Mark, Wedberg, and Jewel. So these are some of the luminaries at this particular event, which is actually focused on leveraging private investment to supplement federal and state funding to create next generation infrastructure. So where can private investment of various kinds invest in infrastructure assets, actually. So there's a lot of relevance. Tomorrow, I'm actually going to be talking about how, from an urban infrastructure investment perspective, particularly private investment, where we're seeing a lot of interesting kind of focus on the second and third tier cities that need a lot of support, and there are a lot of gaps in the federal and state funding that are tranches that are coming across. You know, we get preoccupied sometimes with the big tranches of funding that we see coming forward and become sort of horse blinded to the other types of support that these cities need. So just a bit of a preview there. But for me, you know, what I think are some of the most important aspects of ALN, some of the most important aspects of its mission and what it does is, I'll identify three of them, I think. So number one is bringing that systems mindset to asset decarbonization. You know, I don't need to do any kind of urgency messaging here. I think everyone has urgency fatigue around the challenges of sustainability and decarbonization. But, you know, as we all know, and I've done quite a bit of work with the World Economic Forum around this topic, and they can quote a batch of statistics about this as well. The only one I will cite here is that obviously 70% of GHGs come from infrastructure, construction, and operations, so broadly read. So there's a huge opportunity for us to have an impact there from an asset management standpoint. Second, and this is kind of a key part of my role at Jacobs, is really driving digital into the heart of the asset lifecycle. So that's really around enterprise transformation. It's around people and process, and really, I would say technology last, right? It's really about those other aspects of transformation that we got to get right in order to make a big difference in the future of asset management. And then third, you know, as Jen said, you know, the sort of the importing and the exporting of best global practices, really sort of advocating then to kind of optimize the regulatory environment and really amplifying critical thought leadership that is concrete and can make a difference at scale, I think is such an important function of ALN. So I'm really excited to be joining you today, and I look forward to supporting the network going forward. And with that, I think I will turn it back over to Mike.
What is Hillary really like?
Haven't had a chance. The cocktail hour is coming, so I'll let you know.
That's so awesome.
Okay, so that was just a joke, but really, what are you hearing at the events where you're at? Is there anything that you can report in terms of just overall trends or what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, so there's definitely a strong emphasis on, this won't surprise anybody on this call, there's definitely a strong emphasis on AI and the impact of AI on a broad range of infrastructure, operations, long-term investments in mixed-use developments, for example. And so what is that going to achieve? Well, what are all the sort of the possibilities there? So inevitably that's coming these days with some sort of AI demonstration, which I was at a transportation conference a few weeks ago, and the demonstration was by a friend of mine from Microsoft who processed a Department of Transportation manual. I think it was something like 25,000 pages within 3 minutes on stage, and then had natural language answers to questions that sort of devolved that, reverse engineered that from the manual. So you can see the kind of efficiencies that we're talking about. So how can you use that to like, say, for example, to streamline, responses to road incidents, things like that. Translating that into an infrastructure and perspective is definitely, AI is definitely, one of those things that are focused here. Also, private investment tends to be, and I would say this is a little bit of a, maybe slightly of a fault, that tends to be quite focused on the next gen infrastructure like 5G, edge, multi-edge cloud, and things like that. And it sometimes feels like a hammer looking for a nail. Right. And that's where ALN, for example, can help to bring some of that industry perspective, some of the prioritized use cases that actually are based on real operational requirements and current state needs, as opposed to just doing this stuff off in a vacuum somewhere. But there's definitely that focus as well. And then finally, I just, as I mentioned before, kind of filling in the gaps. There's a lot of money coming from the IIJA, from the IRA, from state funding packages and things like that. So where are the areas where venture money, where family investment money, where large institutional funding, but private funding, where can they place a bet for 5, 10, 20 years and see some sort of steady return on capital?
Well, thank you very much. And before we go to Earl Jackson, Steve, I want to build on what you're saying about AI. We were going to announce later today that in this program that we're also going to be starting an aviation asset leadership board and a ports asset leadership board. They're kind of related because they're both ports, water and air. And our ports asset leadership board is already scheduled a AI initiative. We'll be having a series of meetings leading up to a web presentation in August. And that builds on the very historic AI event we did with ALN member Onuma Inc. earlier this year. And what has developed in terms of combining both the words and images. I didn't know it, but there are a bunch of different types of AI, and you have to use the different AIs to get the different results you want, and then combine them. What's improved, happened since February is mind-blowing. And I think we're going to see the fastest change in business processes that humanity's ever experienced.
Yeah.
And the encouraging word is we can use these tools for good. Of course, you can also use them for bad, but we can use them for good. So,
yeah. I also wanted to add something on there too. I mean, Steve mentioned the importance of digital in this space, and we're talking about AI, but it's interesting because asset management always has the new, like for a minute there, it was all about BIM and how can we leverage all of these design documents in a BIM format. And that's, I wouldn't say has come and gone, but it sort of was leapfrogged by digital twin and layering in that. And now AI is coming on fast and furious. And we know that this is going to sort of be the theme about how do we leverage this in a meaningful way. So we're taking advantage of it. And I do want to just kick back to one safety moment. Sorry, Mike, safety's a huge
no worries.
part.
This is a panel. People should be talking over each other.
Yeah, yes. I feel compelled to share this right now because it's been in my family chat around AI. So apparently, and safety is a huge part of Jacob's culture, right? So we usually start meetings with the safety or culture of caring. Apparently, AI has gotten to the point where it's able to lift people, especially people in public places, social media or calls like this, lift people's voices and sort of take those messages where they can call family members. So they could use my voice to call my mom and say, Mom, I'm in distress. I need you to immediately send me money. And this has been like this scam that I've been hearing a lot of over the past 4 to 6 weeks, where it's happening more and more and it's snowballing. So the safety tip is for each family to come up with a code name. So for ours, it was watermelon. I don't know, it just popped in my head. I said, let's use watermelon. So if the kid was calling and it was truly them, they would drop the word watermelon. So I would know that it wasn't, artificial intelligence lifting their voice and calling for millions of dollars.
That is a wonderful public service announcement. Thank you for that. Now you got to change your code.
Thank you. Okay, yes, good point.
We're all going to be using watermelon now.
So Earl, thank you for joining us again. We met Earl last year at the Government Finance Officers Association meeting. And the ALN provided a couple of ALN executive briefings to Denver Transportation and Infrastructure that Jacobs was involved in. And Earl was kind enough to come to Washington, D.C. and speak at our event last year at the National Academy of Sciences. So thanks for joining us again. September is a long time ago. What have you been up to?
It feels like it was just yesterday. And I actually thought that I'd see you again here this year at GFOA, which is where I'm at right now. So,
oh, wonderful.
Yeah. But yeah, hi team. Thanks for having me here. Earl Jackson, Deputy Manager and Chief Financial Officer at the Denver Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. I've been in this role here now about 17 months right now. And prior to that, spent most of my time in primarily rail and public transportation prior to that. So very asset intensive organizations that have gone through various elements of asset management and leadership change over the last decade to provide some very valuable experience here on this topic. And so here at Denver, over the last few years, the department has grown considerably. Whether it be with the number of employees, is also the number of assets and services that we provide. And so our journey has been centered around really, how do we best evolve to better meet the needs of the public today versus the public of 5, 6, or 7 years ago. And so a lot of that, particularly around, services that we provide, essential services, garbage collection, snow plowing, and other items. It's a lot of resources and a lot of coordination. And how do we best make ourselves more effective at doing that, whether it be service excellence and delivery, but also being much more methodical about capital investment and determining maintenance costs and optimizing that and making sure that we're really getting the best value we can out of the resources that we have. So it's been an interesting journey, still have a lot of work to do. Here over the last year or so, since we've initially connected, we've been working on really just trying to properly set the foundation and stand up our asset management transformation journey. So we've been working with WSP to really on a number of different things, from maturity assessment to getting interviews from various members across the team on what they feel asset management should be, what do they think is important, and also working through putting together our first strategic asset management plan, which should be forthcoming along with an associated implementation plan coming here over the coming months. So definitely a journey thus far, because the department's had some false starts in the past, but nonetheless, I think this time go around is going to be the one that makes that truly takes off. And so very excited to officially be connected with the team here. And I think ALN has done a really good job at connecting us with other stakeholders to learn best practices and also various things within the industry and points of consideration to not only help us make this as best as possible, but to ensure we don't reinvent the wheel when we don't need to. So
I think every organization has jump starts and false starts and issues.
Yeah.
We're identifying culture as really the main issue that leadership has to address. Not that policy and strategy and everything else isn't important, but culture isn't everything. But if you don't have culture, you've got nothing.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because when we put together our first official asset management policy here earlier this year, we wanted to be really focused more on what brings our department together. It's that culture of service. And we really wanted to make sure, because our policy it's literally an acronym for service. And so by making that connection to more than just asset management, but how asset management really, and really the culture and everything that goes into it, it's more than just a system. It's the people, the process, the technology, and everything coming together to ensure that we can effectively deliver the services that we're chartered to do. So the broader we can make that connection, I found that the more people we were able to sort of buy in and have buy-in with to show that this is the right path to go on.
Excellent.
Stand for service. Do you know that you got it? What is it?
So we went through various iterations of like various words. And so it's service, expectations, service, excellence, value, innovation, and continuous excellence.
Awesome.
I think I might have some of those E's mixed up. But
yeah, no, that's cool. I love that you
Yeah.
did that with your policy. Very cool.
Yeah, I love a good acronym. So
Yes, that's a good one. Awesome.
Earl, if you, I think one of the most important parts of this is getting people started and how they get started and where to start. If you look back on your journey, with Denver or perhaps further back, what's a piece of advice you would give to somebody contemplating and that's just becoming aware of this, perhaps, that you would suggest?
If you're just starting out, it's so interesting because everyone is starting from different points, right? And everyone has a different, potentially different organizational goals and priorities and everything. But I think that, starting with just an idea on, what can you do to improve where you are today? And really, because the buy-in, I think, probably was the piece that I thought was going to probably be the easiest, but it turned out to be the hardest. And so how do you craft a message early on, and how do you understand who are the stakeholders that need to be involved in something like this, and really sort of gain that coalition needed to really sort of take a step from where you are to where you ideally want to go. And so that, and then I think everything else is on this, particularly in our experience, has been very momentum focused. So once we were able to do that and get some vision around that, get senior leadership buy-in, and really just take advantage of all the resources that are out there, because we were in the same position. That really sort of helped us resurrect the prior efforts to get this going. So yeah.
Great, thanks.
Mhm.
We ready to move on to Claude?
Sure. Thank you, Claude.
May I share my screen?
You, I had done that in the previous program, but I believe you can. I believe you can.
All right, let me try it. Yep, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. So real fast here, I just put together some slides to walk me through this. My name is Claude Tankersley. I'm with the city of St. Petersburg, Florida. And the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, we started our asset management journey about 6 years ago. But the city of St. Petersburg, Florida is located on the west coast of Florida. It's in Pinellas County. It is the largest city within the most densely populated county in the state of Florida. We are the 5th largest city in the state with approximately 260,000 residents. And what happened was in 2016, the city had a crisis. We had a sewer crisis. Our sewer infrastructure failed. And I was not here at the time that it happened. And my predecessor was let go because of the failure. And I was brought in to fix the failure. And so I always say, never let a good crisis go to waste. And so we immediately went to work to try to figure out how to fix our sewer system. So our initial focus, the immediate focus, was to focus on the sewer system itself, because that was in crisis. And so for the years of 2017 to 2019, we put together it was a $4 million integrated water resources master plan that looked at all of our water utilities. That included water, wastewater, reclaimed water, stormwater, natural water bodies, natural systems. We also spent over $400 million in capital asset improvements immediately to get our system back into shape so we were no longer having these sewer spills. We did a complete condition assessment of our utilities, again, of our water and sewer utilities. For instance, on our sewer utilities, we did a CCTV inspection of every single gravity pipe we have in the city. And those pipes run to a little over 1,000 miles of pipes that we inspected over that 5-year period to assess the condition of those pipes as to why we were having these sewer spills. And then another thing that we did was to get all of the public works and utilities departments accredited. So within the St. Petersburg, we have an administration. My administration is called Public Works, but it includes what was traditionally known as Public Works as well as what is traditionally known as utilities. So we had all of those departments accredited through the APWA. So that was the immediate response to the crisis. But what it made me realize was that the crisis revealed that not only do we had a problem in our utilities, but we likely very much had a problem citywide with our assets. And so I started asking questions of the mayor and the other administrators at the time. And so long-range planning to prevent future crises led to the development of a capital asset management program charter. This was a charter that I put together over a 3-year period where I did all the research that I could do. I had my own knowledge as a public works professional, as a utilities professional, but there were areas of the city that I did not have expertise in. City of St. Petersburg, we own a port, we own an airport, we own libraries, we own community centers, we own performing arts centers, we own lots of police stations, fire stations, our parks and recreation facilities. We own a lot of different assets that are outside of the traditional public works or utilities assets, and I frankly didn't have experience with them. And so I was looking to see what might be out there that we could use to help prepare a capital asset management program that the whole city could use. In response to our crisis to the sewer system, we were applying those asset management principles just to the utilities, but now I wanted to look at the whole city. So we put together a capital asset program charter, had to use my political skills to convince the mayor at the time to back it because there was significant resistance to it from the other administrations. But in 2021, our mayor did create a capital asset management policy that spells out the policies, the administrative policy for all departments within the city, not just utilities, not just roads and streets and transportation, but all the other departments I mentioned, every single department in the city. How can all those departments work together cohesively to manage our assets to the highest and best use? And so that was in 2021 when we put together that policy. And then in 2022 and 23, working with Jacobs, we put together our strategic asset management plan, our SAMP. We are wrapping that up as we speak right now. We have a draft in-house that we're finalizing. But this SAMP allows us to establish that framework of how we're going to oversee the management of all citywide assets. It's really easy, not easy, I shouldn't say it's easy, but it's one thing to tackle a single department at a time. It's another thing to tackle a city that has dozens of departments and thousands of employees, and it's a real challenge. And so we've worked on putting together our asset management vision, our policies, objectives. How do we collaborate between the departments? How do we use technology to make sure that we're getting the most efficiency in our programs? And so that's where we are now. So some of the challenges we found along the way was that the sewer crisis revealed that we had no citywide framework or a policy for asset management. Every department, sometimes even different divisions within a single department, manage their assets differently. Some of them had asset inventories, many of them did not. Many of the asset inventories were incomplete. Very few of them had asset condition assessments, and those that did were very incomplete. There were very, very few long-term asset management plans. As I mentioned, one of the first things we did was put together the Integrated Water Resources Master Plan as a 20-year master plan for our utilities. Very few of the other departments had any kind of master plan. The CIPs for other departments rarely looked beyond a 5-year window. And many of our assets, of course, last for decades. I also found one of the challenges that I found along the way is that I could find no templates to guide me as a municipal employee, no templates to guide me as a government employee on how to move forward with government asset management programs. And frankly, government asset management programs shares a lot in common with non-governmental agencies, but there's a lot of uniqueness things that you know are little landmines you have to be aware of in government. And so I went to things like the League of Cities, the American Public Works Association. I did scores of internet searches trying to find any other municipality, city within the United States that had gone through this process, and I could not find them. That didn't mean they didn't exist. It just means that they perhaps didn't advertise that information on their web pages, and I could not find them. And so that was a real, that's what took me 3 years to go through this process of putting together a charter to convince my mayor that this is something we wanted to do. Because very few mayors want to be the first mayor to implement a program that they can't turn and look at another mayor and, oh, you've done it successfully? Okay, good. And so I had to convince them of that. Some of the other things that we ran into was institutional resistance. This was the cultural issues that we've talked about. A lot of people were, afraid of what it'll be discover, oh, you'll discover that I've been doing it wrong all these years, or are you accusing me of not doing it right? A lot of people had been using the political process to receive funding for their projects. Now they were fearful that with data-based analysis that they would have to compete against other people based off of data, not just politics, and they may not win. A lot of people were fearful of the cost. What was the return? What was the value of this? That was one of the biggest questions I kept getting was, okay, if we're going to spend all this money to do all this planning and put together all these processes, how's it going to pay for itself? Wouldn't it be better to use that money rather than doing all the inventory and asset condition assessments? Shouldn't we just use that money to fix the assets in the first place? We also here in Florida have the Florida Public Records Law is the most stringent in the United States. It is the tightest, it is the most, any citizen within the state of Florida can find just about any document they want and can ask for it without they don't have to give a reason, they don't have to give their name, and we're required to provide it. What that means is that everything we do is in the sunshine. Every document we would create will be called out as a public records by the local media. And so one of the biggest concerns was that as we go through this process and we start discovering assets that we forgot we had or assets that we weren't managing properly, that as soon as we had a document that showed that there was going to be a public records request, it was going to get out to the media, and we were going to be crucified for it. So there's a lot of fear just around that very specific Florida Public Records Law. The value that it has brought to the organization so far, though, has been we do have significant elected official support. We have significant staff and mid-management support. Really, the fear is really at the senior executive level, my level, the administrative level. So here in the city of St. Petersburg, we have the council, which is our legislative body. We have the mayor, which is the executive. But then you have the administrators, people like me, that are at the senior executive level. And that's where most of the fear was at that level. Because we started first in public works, because we started first in our sewer system back in 2016, and we had to quickly put together a program, spend money and put together a program. The program we put together that was initiated in 2016 and that came together in 2019, we've already shown that we can reduce that 20-year program by $500 million just by applying some of the asset management principles that we've been forced to do. The asset inventory, the asset condition assessment, those kind of things have allowed us to really narrow down what we thought we were going to have to spend on our capital improvements. It also allowed us the ability to transition from a 90% bond and 10% cash CIP funding ratio to a 50-50 bond to cash ratio. And the reason for this is for a generational equity, because many of the assets that we are fixing or building right now are going to last for generations. And so we need to make sure that it's not just this generation that pays for it, or it's not just our children and grandchildren's generations that pay for it, but that equity is spread across all the generations. So those were the values that we've seen so far. But frankly, I really wish that I'd had something like ALN 7 years ago when I started this process, that I wouldn't have had to be self-taught. But thank you for the opportunity to share with you our experience.
Well, thank you, Claude. That was actually quite inspirational. And I'm so glad we have that list of objections. I think it'll be very helpful. Last year at the GFOA conference, there was a big banner that says, "Why we fight. This is the way we always have done it." Or how to overcome. This is the way we have always done it. I was so happy to see an association advertising that. And boy, you listed the values. We've got a lot of the audience are passionate about asset management. There's been so much flying in the comment section and questions and everything. But before we get to that, I want to see if any of the other panelists have questions for Claude. Okay, so have you engaged the Department of Economic Development? Is that an area? Okay, can you address that? That was from Cecilia Mowat.
Yes, and so I'm assuming you're talking about our city of St. Petersburg. We call it our City Development Administration, and it focuses on city development and economic incentives and opportunities and so forth. And so, yes, they've been involved from the very beginning once the mayor got on board. So again, I had to convince the mayor for us to move forward with this because the other administrations were afraid of it. They thought it was going to be a waste of money. They didn't like it. They were fighting against it. So I had to spend significant political capital in 3 years lobbying the mayor to get the mayor on board, say, okay, we're going to do this. Once that occurred, now all the administrators are on board, all the administrations are on board. And yes, we do include the Economic Development Administration.
Excellent. So without the ALN, you were working from the ALN playbook. Actually, it's the ISO 55001 playbook that says your the top management shall sign your policy. So you can't get any more top management than mayor. So that was congratulations to you for fighting that battle to get there. So Earl, in Denver, what was the top level of support you have seen, and has it grown since you've started your journey?
So I think that, support at the executive level was it wasn't the hard part, because I think that we all understood the need for us to, one, give this another go, because I told you in prior that this is sort of the third time around that we were doing this. And I think that there might have been a little bit of just hesitation on okay, we've tried twice before, this may not work, but I think the approach that we had took prior, and this predated my time in this role, it was really focused on systems and not necessarily the holistic of the culture as a whole approach. And the fact that this essentially, when done right, over time is going to change the way we do business. And so that big whole of department approach was lacking that on those prior iterations, and also it was siloed to primarily one department, even though clearly multiple departments have various roles and stakes in it, from operations to finance to safety to capital planning and every other department in between. And so the more we made it holistic and the more we involved people, people at various levels of the organization were largely bought in. There's still some holdouts, as there always is with anything, but I think that we know that we have to do this for now a number of reasons. We are working currently to become a direct federal recipient of federal funds, and they have a performance and asset management criteria and guidelines that we'll need to follow. So that's part of sort of the one of the reasons we went after this. But there's also some other local, local requirements and local things that is going to help us as well. And so the more we can illustrate the benefits and the more we can illustrate, it's going to really, change the way we do business, make things for the better. I think the more people sort of will bought in. And I think that you have to tailor that message to various different types of people throughout the organizational change or throughout the organizational chain, because one message that's one message that goes to the top, and delivering that same message that goes to the bottom in the same way might not hit the same way. And so you have to meet people where they are in the level of understanding and selling off those benefits and everything. So yeah.
Thank you. And I saw Jim had his hand up. I saw his microphone off, so I knew he wanted to say something. And then after Jim comments, Steve, will you address value of government and value versus value of private organization? So Jim.
You snuck a question in ahead of me, Mike.
Well, I had to let Steve kind of think about it before I jump on him.
Yeah, well, I didn't, from the time Stephen started talking about infrastructure and the emphasis on new kinds of infrastructure. And then Claude's just having one little bullet there or two to talk about how the remarkable success of having the city take a long-term view. And it seems like such a simple statement, but it is maybe the big dog in this whole fight is the people, Stephen, that you're dealing with, not that I know specifically for them, but in general, people want to build new things and cut ribbons and, big investment in new stuff. And my line on this has been, as long as we've had the ALN, is crumbling infrastructure is a problem. And when we come up with a solution, we can't just allow the new infrastructure to again crumble. That, making allowance for and taking into consideration this long-term view is just critical. And there's lots of good information on, how much of the overall investment is the constructed investment, et cetera. And everything tells us these huge numbers for maintaining assets and keeping them operational for years and years. So I hope, Stephen, that maybe you got some ammunition from Claude's presentation about, some of the benefits that can come from having that kind of long-term view. And to turn that into a question, I'd say, so Claude, how'd you do that? How'd you get him to have a long-term view?
I got lucky that I had a mayor that was willing to look beyond his own term. So here in the city of St. Petersburg, our elected officials are limited to 2 elected terms, so 8 years total. After 8 years, they move on. They can't stay. And that's part of the challenge of doing this kind of long-term planning in a city or a municipal government where you have turnover in your executive team. Every 4 to 8 years, we're going to have a brand new mayor. And that brand new mayor might have a completely different vision. We got lucky that the outgoing mayor was willing to put his name to the policy, and the incoming mayor was convinced that it was a good policy and kept it on. I don't know, and I can only hope and pray that future mayors, future councils will see the benefit in this. But as we've always seen, at least here in the public works side, utility side of cities, people don't want to pay for their water. They don't want to pay for their sewer. Water and sewer feels like a natural human right to us now. So therefore we should get it for free, or at least as cheap as possible. So we can then spend our money on the things that we really enjoy in life. And so therefore, historically, politicians have been hesitant to raise water and sewer rates as appropriate to maintain these systems that last 50 to 70 years. When those systems are underground, they're buried, you can't see them, so you don't know what condition they're in. And so there's always the chance that here in St. Pete, we'll go back to that kind of mentality.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'm just add on there. So coming back to Jim, some of your questions there. So I think that having the long-term view is nice, and Claude having a mayor that cares about legacy beyond their specific term is ideal. Also, worth bearing in mind that while we should have the long-term view, there are short-term challenges. I mean, climate change and climate disruption are no longer sort of off on the horizon and things that are kind of hypothetical. I mean, we're seeing the effects on a regular basis now. So, if ever there's been evidence that we, need to decarbonize operations to the fullest extent possible and make these systems as resilient as we can through every single element that we have, every single tool that we have in the toolbox, let's go for it, right? And so some of them will be digital and some of them will not, and we just it's a full, coming back to what I said before about the systems mindset, the end-to-end frame of thinking. Got to have that as part of the way that you think about it. The other thing is around, it's come up a few times, but it's worth stressing that having these assets and systems be as inclusive as possible. I mean, it's such an important focus of the federal funding, and frankly, even in the private funding that I see, here, it's really about, okay, if you want to invest in some sort of next level or next generation telecommunications infrastructure in a particular town, well, that's great. How are you going to offset that by making Wi-Fi available for free in other locations, right? So closing the digital divide. So there's all kinds of sort of checks and balances that need to be done in order to make sure that we got the full picture accounted for.
Awesome. Thanks.
So if there was a question about implementation and processes. So I was just commenting to Andrea Andrews that there has been comment. I'm so sorry, I didn't have my microphone on. So Andrea Andrews had asked about implementation and processes. And I commented that there has been discussion about buy-in processes. I think that is huge, and that's the leadership aspect of this. And there's been policy implementation and the process of going through that. I suspect she might mean more about what was done with the sewers. Claude, was there anything that ISO 55001 helped guide you through to improve the sewer system?
So here's where I'm going to admit my ignorance, folks.
Okay.
I'm not that familiar with ISO 55000. I'm not. I have to admit, I did not start there. I started basically, to be honest with you, I found that there were communities in Canada and Australia that seemed to be further ahead than the United States on their implementation of asset management programs. So I was able to go to their websites. There's the Federation of Canadian Municipalities that has a really great portion on their website about asset management. So I will admit my ignorance there. We have not yet actually gone down really investigating the ISO 55000, how it fits into what we do. What we did do, to fix our sewer system is we realized that the reason it was failing was because the system had developed enough age and cracks and joint separations that whenever we'd get a large rainstorm, all of a sudden we went from treating only sewage to treating sewage plus 5 times that amount in terms of rainwater and stormwater and groundwater. And so by going in and TVing all of our lines to find out exactly what the condition of our lines were, it allowed us to focus on repairing those lines that were the most damaged, that were allowing the most amount of infiltration and inflow into the system. And then we would go in and we'd line those pipes with a new pipe to stop that inflow and infiltration. And at the same time, we expanded our treatment capacity so that until we were able to reduce the amount of water getting into the system, we were able to treat the water that was so that we would have no more spills. What we have found is that we did that treatment expansion, which was great. We needed it. We didn't have any more spills. We were still creating a lot of extra water. But we actually found that by doing the condition assessment, by doing the analysis we did heat maps of our system, trying to figure out what areas were were more compromised than others. We were able to focus on fixing those areas, and we were expecting to get about a 6 to 8% decrease in I&I over the period that we completed, and we ended up getting about a 10 to 12% decrease in I&I with inflow and infiltration. So that was one of the areas that it helped us tremendously.
So,
A little bit too from a process standpoint though. So, Claude always makes me chuckle because, I'm not an expert in this space, but a lot of what St. Pete is doing does start to align with ISO 55000, right? Which was just introduced in 2014. So it's been 9 years, but we have found that, Europe and Australia and even Canada have been much further along than here in the United States on these practices, but more and more organizations are recognizing that there is a standard. Like Earl said, we don't need to recreate the wheel on these things. They're being done in a more sophisticated way. So let's learn from that. But a lot of what St. Pete is doing, they did a charter, they have a policy, now they have a SAMP, they have asset goals and objectives. So I think Claude is more aligned than what he realizes. But another big part of process, and I don't know, we have a couple Jacobs folks on the phone, Janine Giarusso, if she's still on, she's our process guru, she's a process gal. But when you start to implement asset management, that implementation of this systematic end-to-end approach, there's lots of processes that need to be developed to start to have meaningful, good data, which is going to drive decisions. So Jim, mentioned how the politicians like these ribbon cutting ceremonies and they want to sort of build the new shiny things. And, so they're doing that. Maintenance likes to be the firefighters, honestly, having things break and then fixing them and we solved this particular problem. A lot of, this is a bold, overgeneralization, but sometimes maintenance people really thrive on doing sort of reaction, save the day from an asset that failed. But for all these things to start to work in a systematic way, there needs to be standard processes as well as standard operating procedures about how are we going to collect meaningful data that's going to help us drive decisions long-term. And decisions can be everything from where do we invest? And what's the consequence of failure for this asset? What are our most critical assets that we have that we're willing to invest in? What are those ones that we might be able to fail and the consequence of failure is not as impactful? So to start to work through all of these things, it requires standard processes and procedures. And it's not the cool new sexy stuff around millions and millions of dollars. It is that hard work that follows the charter and the SAMP and all this sort of coalition team building where let's talk about how we're going to do this as an organization long-term, because a lot of asset management is around data, whether it's data that's coming in fast and furious from building automation systems, or whether it's a work order that a maintenance person's keying in. A lot of asset management decisions are relying on data. The way you get meaningful data that you can really base decisions on ties back to standard processes and procedures. So that's a big part of any implementation of a strategic program. So sort of different than the angle Claude was speaking to, which was very specific to the water system. This is about, strategic asset management, standard processes.
I actually love that Claude went for the citywide policy. And I love that you were engaging in policy that impacted areas outside your expertise, because what ISO 55001 does, and others standards also, is just provide best practices to follow. And it's not as prescriptive as people think. It is more of a to-do list that helps you, and you can fill it in any way. And there are many structured approaches to asset management. And guess what? They all map to each other very well. Some might, put something else first or second, but when smart people get together and build a consensus document, they tend to come up with many of the same ideas. Earl or Jim, looks like you were reaching for the button.
Yeah, I just wanted to say briefly that we just last week had the ISO 55000 meeting in Philadelphia that, the US was proud to host, and we had a really good delegation there. sub meeting room I was involved in was on the ISO 55000, the zero document. And I'd been shepherding the principles, over the last year and a half or 2 years of this process. And one of the thoughts that emerged that I really liked coming out of the Philadelphia meetings is where the 2014 version had as one of the fundamentals assurance. We're now transforming those into principles, and assurance has become governance, which I think is a much more interesting term and very much in line with Jennifer's comments. There's leadership. We focused on that, getting the buy-in and the culture and all that, but just the governance, every day doing it, recognizing you need a framework and using it, and understanding, as Mike said, how that will help you solve problems as they occur, because problems are going to occur. But instead of having everything be, a fire drill emergency, you can marshal your resources and have a way to go about identifying and solving problems. Very valuable.
Earl, this might be a good time for you to share any standard or best practices that you've identified and are useful, whether it's a financial best practice or asset management. What have you encountered in your journey?
In terms of best practices, is this just ongoing daily best practices, or just best practices that have been along that we've put together along the journey for this?
Anything you've identified, or this road surfacing standard came along, and boy, aren't we glad. I know that Colorado has been done some leadership activities in road surfacing, so I just use that as an example. I don't know if there's anything, but also like financial standards. I have no idea what's out there for best practices in financial reporting.
Yeah, so in terms of best practices, I think that back to one of the original points that I made earlier about not reinventing the wheel, the U.S. Department of Transportation, particularly when it comes to asset management, performance and asset management, as what they call it, has a series of best practices that really were very beneficial in helping us sort of set up and stand up many aspects of our program. And I mean, we're still sort of in a work in progress right now, because we haven't even gotten yet to the implementation plan. But nonetheless, I think, best practices in general, having teams involved much more often and engaged much more often definitely is a good thing to do to make sure that people don't lose sight of these goals. I know particularly on our asphalt and paving program, we typically aim for a goal of about 400-ish lane miles a year. And so how do we most effectively do that and develop processes to ensure that we can execute around that? And so, and then each of our capital maintenance programs have various goals, as well as signals, bridges, and things like that. And so I think that the more you can draw process improvement, process documentation to our goals and to asset management, the better, because all of that sort of runs in tandem, and it's this big continuous circle that sort of feeds each other. So hopefully that answered the question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much there.
Yeah.
And I was also wondering, Earl, if you might be able to give us a little bit of a report from GFOA. It's only the second or maybe third day there, but is there some flavor from the Government Finance Officers Association annual conference that you can share with us?
Yeah, so I think that in terms of number of days, I think it depends on who you ask, because technically we started on Friday.
Oh,
which I've never gone to a conference that started on a Friday in my life. And so I guess there's a time for everything, or a new for everything. And so, yeah, so this for me is day number 1, 2, 3, 4, because I did Friday, Saturday, and then yesterday and today. And one thing that I can definitely tell you in comparison to last year was that there are more sessions focused on asset management than there historically have been. Which
Very
I
good.
think that speaks to the testament of the importance of the topic, because many of these topics, and there are some exceptions, but many of the topics, it's sort of a one and done, and it might be tailored to a specific situation. But nonetheless, I think there was like 4 or 5 sessions on asset management thus far. And so it's a very great thing to see. And I hope there continues to be more, because there's different niches for different aspects of this particular, just it relates to capital planning, to how it relates to just overall effectiveness. I went to yesterday a session on international asset management and capital planning. So they had a few organizations from overseas. I think one was in Australia and another one was, they were kind of all over. And so to hear some of the experiences that they've experienced overseas, which typically on this discipline, they're far ahead of us than in the United States. And so it was nice to see that and hear about those stories and their lessons learned. So.
Excellent. I'm very glad to hear that. We were honored to have a panel last year where we met, and glad to know that they're expanding their asset management initiatives. The president of the GFOA had said that was her goal. So it's glad to see it's being successful. And Claude's CFO is at the GFOA conference. I see his hand is up.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that our CFO from the city of St. Petersburg is there at that conference, and I know she was looking forward to attending some of the asset management seminars, because she has been actually one of the staunch supporters of this process. I mentioned that in the beginning. I received a lot of pushback from many folks that were fearful of it. Not our CFO. Our CFO was like, y'all need to do this. We need to do this. And so maybe you'll run into her there, but I'm just glad to hear that.
What is her name, so that Earl and Kyle might say hello?
Her name is Ann Fritz. And she's from the city of St. Petersburg.
So
nice.
On cue, Kyle Wedberg, who is a senior manager at the Government Finance Officers Association and who received his PhD, I believe, the day before last year's conference. Talk about stress. So this year must seem like a walk in the park after all the pressure from last year.
And it's much more park-like here in Portland, so it matches. Yeah, no, I was leaving conference on Wednesday last year and defended my dissertation on Saturday, so it's a little bit of a blur from last year. But I will say, just as an update from conference here, we had a huge crowd for strategic asset management. First time we had offered that as a pre-conference session. We have had sessions with some international partners. We had a session looking at asset management in Sweden, New Zealand, and Australia, which was fascinating. We've had some sessions on resiliency and climate change as it relates to asset management. So Roy Clark from the Natural Assets Initiative, Roy Brook from Natural Assets Initiative in Canada, thinking about how we use and utilize natural assets, wetlands, watersheds, and think of their value versus trying to engineer our way out of this, thinking about the balance. We had Don Johnson from Louisiana Department of Transportation thinking about infrastructure management in coastal states. And then today I'm getting ready. I'm actually on stage in Oregon Room 202 for all of you that are at the conference for 2 panels. One on proactive asset management with some really interesting test cases from Cleveland, from Prince Edward County, Ontario, and from the Barossa region, which is the area outside of Adelaide in Australia, talking about thinking about moving asset management from reactive to proactive. And then a first of its kind, for us anyway, we've partnered with the American Public Works Association, and we're going to present on a panel here at the GFOA conference. That panel will then, the exact panel will be mirrored and presented in August at the APWA conference. And so for this conference, it's about how to work better with your public works director. For APWA, it's how to work better with the finance department. And it's a conversation about what does this look like for us to get out of our silos and work together to do better asset management for the communities. And so for that one, we've got Oregon City, Oregon, talented public works director who's been president of the APWA here in Oregon by the name of John Lewis, and then 2 members of the team in Tulare County, California. So the assistant county administrator, John Hess, and the head of capital planning, Brooke Sisk, will be on that panel. And if you're going to be at APWA in August, you'll have the opportunity to see it there. So we'll see how that works, and continuing to stretch ourselves to have the finance director think of themselves, in addition to everything else they're doing, as the person who is the right place to lead this charge and this work on progressive asset management.
That is so good to hear. And we're so proud to have our relationship with the Government Finance Officers Association, because that is a leadership position. And Kyle, if you haven't met him, I'd like to introduce you to Claude Tankersley, the Public Works Administrator for St. Pete, Florida. And Claude, your smile is too big for us not to let you have the microphone next.
No, I'm just, everything that Kyle's been saying is just as music to my ears, because Kyle, as I was explaining my journey through this, my normal sources like APWA or the American or the National League of Cities, the type of things that I would normally go to get resources on asset management, I couldn't get those resources from them. And so I'm just glad to hear that APWA is now partnering with you guys, and that just made me smile.
And I'm going to have to be just to check in on this, but Claude, yesterday in the panel discussion that we had on environmental, my friend Don Johnson from Department of Transportation, Louisiana, made a joke that I was not his first choice, or he was not my first choice. Like we laughed about it. We were supposed to have people from Fort Lauderdale on this panel. And because of historic rains and the destruction of City Hall, yes, their delegation couldn't come. So I promised them next year in Orlando, when the GFOA conference is going to be down in Florida, they're going to lead the panel on what it means to be dealing with changing environmental conditions relative to, because there's not enough money to build your way out of this. You have to use your existing assets and evolution of those assets and thinking about adding. So I'm excited, Claude. Hopefully you'll be able to make the trip up to Orlando and we can meet there.
That'd be great.
We'll further the relationship, and perhaps the Asset Leadership Network and the ALN Cities and Places Asset Leadership Board can present and bring a lot of things together. So Kyle, I know you're in the middle of so much. Thank you so much for taking time out of your annual conference to visit with us. You really contributed quite a bit. If you need to go, we want to let you be able to move on.
You're very welcome. I do have to jump, but I saw the one question, and I think, CFOs haven't, the intersectionality is their place that they sit relative to the rest of the government. Even in governments with bad relationships, you still got to go talk to finance once a year for the operating budget, right? That it is one of the places that has the opportunity to really build on this on an annual basis. And I think one of the things that I'm hoping comes out of the conversation that we're about to have today is there's probably more and better data in your public works and engineering department than you realize as the CFO. And so I think part of bridging that divide is just having the conversations to have a really good understanding about what you have in terms of data. I know that the best asset management systems in the country do not have the CFO becoming an expert on pavement conditioning index or HVAC treatments. They empower those that understand that, and they become a conductor, right? They are working with the different sections of the orchestra that is the city. Don Johnson, I quote him twice, so I'll quote him 3 times and then be done. We were talking about useful life, and he said, if you ask a political leader, the useful life of the asset is exactly as long as their term in office, right? So I thought it was an insightful comment in that the thing that the public works director and the CFO definitely have in common is that they were there before and they're going to be there after. They're the people that are thinking in a longitudinal stewardship relationship to assets and the management of the resources of the community. And so if they're working together, and I think the strongest asset management systems and capital planning systems, long-term financial planning systems, they have collaboration. They have multiple parties from inside the city coming together and coming to some level of service level agreement and future thinking that then they're presenting as a unified front, so that it's not just the person who can do the best presentation getting all the resources, but rather a structured and thoughtful plan presented as part of the CIP, the long-term financial plan, and then ultimately rolling down into year 0 of the operating budget and the year we're standing in for the capital operating budget as well. So I wish I could stay. I will be on longer next time. Earl, I recognize that yellow wall and I will walk past it.
Absolutely, yes. I have to jump as well.
Thank you both so much, and appreciate it. We'll keep conversations going. Enjoy the conference there, and we'll be in touch. And
absolutely, thank you.
All right,
thanks,
thank you, Jennifer. We'll let Claude follow up, and then I'd like you to comment.
So I just wanted to comment on something that Kyle brought up that is part of our equation, and that is service levels of service. And so he mentioned Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale was devastated this year by getting 26 inches of rain in 24 hours. And I don't think there's a single community in the whole world that has built their drainage system to handle 26 inches of rain in 24 hours. So the level of service that our customers expect, though, is that we get 26 inches of rain, it still shouldn't flood. And so we have to talk to our customers, and we have actually done analyses for what kind of level of service do we expect to be able to handle. A 7-inch rain in 24 hours, a 5-inch rain, a 9-inch rain, and how much does it cost for us to build our systems to be able to handle those levels of services? And then you have to have those really difficult conversations with the public that, you might want us to be able to handle 20 inches of rain in 24 hours, but you're not willing to pay the $400 billion necessary for us to build it. So let's talk about what you are willing to pay for. And it's a very difficult conversation on the public level.
People don't want to have grown-up conversations, do they? They just want to say, this is what I want. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Well, no, I just think it's, it's a really good conversation, the levels of service, right? I mean, and as organizations start to get more mature in their asset management practices and procedures, those are conversations that need to be had, because the higher level of service, the more expensive it is. And, really sort of starting to understand those benefits and the trade-offs from a financial standpoint. The other thing I was going to comment on was interesting listening to the CFO perspective. So when I first introduced, I said, something that our clients often talk about is what are other organizations doing? What are best practices? Those are, 99% of the time, those are questions that are asked. Another one that's consistently asked is, well, who should lead an asset management program? Right? Is it engineering? Is it finance? Is it public works? And, we're often asked for a recommendation. Personally, for me, I think there is no right answer. I think it really gets down to that leadership. Where do you have a leader that understands that that leadership and that collaboration and that organizational culture change is critical to the success of an asset management program. So like in the case of St. Pete, they've had that in Claude that really understood the perspective. And even though he claims not to be an asset management expert, he's done these things that are making the program successful, right? So right now, I would say that the asset management program is owned by Public Works, right? But if Claude happened to be in maintenance and he was doing the same thing, then that's probably the right place for it to be owned. So I think very much so it's not about what is the right departments, because asset management cuts across so many various departments. Is where do you have that visionary leadership and that strong collaborative approach to leadership that's going to really help implement a holistic asset management program. So yeah, I just wanted to add that to the discussion.
So Claude may not be an asset management specialist, but he's clearly an asset leadership specialist.
Yes. Yes.
It's early, but I think we could end on that. No, that's just a real important statement. Go ahead, Jim.
Just one thought, maybe it's the topic for the next time. And we're just starting to get to it at the end with the level of service. But, I've been really focused on that Peter Duffy model and asset value preservation and asset value creation. And the asset creation part is it's, as Jack Dempsey would say, it's not about the ship, it's about pulling the kid out of the water. It's not about having the pipes, it's about people's homes not flooding. It's what's the value, the value creation that, why do we have these assets and what are we doing with them? And I think part of the ALN's mission was to advance, not to in any way minimize the value preservation part, because it's huge amounts of money. But the way to get organizational leaders to understand it, I think, one path is the value creation model. And what are you going to get for this? Here's why we're doing it. It's the transportation system is great, but it's all about getting somebody from their home to work and back again. That's what it's about. And if we, include that in our thinking, and entailing equity and sustainability and all those things, I think it leads us to good decisions if we think that way.
Claude, Jim, I suspect that's your closing comment.
That is, sure.
Claude, do you have any closing comment?
No, other than thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward to continuing to learn about asset management.
Well, thank you. And if anybody reads any of the comments about Claude, he is just universally applauded as an all-round nice guy and excellent leader. So we are privileged to have you as a co-chair of the ALN Cities and Places Asset Leadership Board. And let's go to your co-chair, Jennifer. Any closing comments you'd like to make?
I'll second that about Claude, an all-around great guy, and yeah, really great discussion. Lots of different sort of avenues that we discussed, and just really appreciate the dialogue and the opportunity for this platform. So thank you.
I would like to extend my appreciation to the panelists and the attendees for their patience as we got started. I really apologize for the slow start, but boy, was it worth it. We are a network, and was the networking right in front of our very eyes here. It was so good to see the handoffs between people and the enthusiasm about the same topics and building on each other's insights and experience. It was really a wonderful discussion. And thank you to the audience. What a dynamic engagement. People were really enjoying this. So we look forward to other City and Places Asset Leadership Board activities. if anybody has ideas on topics or approaches or papers or ways they want to get involved and help spread best practices, please reach out and let us know, and we'll keep you informed of our activities. And also, Jennifer is very interested in the Aviation Asset Leadership Board. So all your friends who are doing the airports, send them over to us and we'll start forming the same type of discussion focused on specifically the challenges that airports look at. And a little plug for our ports, water ports Asset Leadership Board, and the AI Digital Twin workshop we're going to be having in August. Keep an eye out for that. We have a program on Thursday that will be highlighting what's coming up. Our organizational platinum member, Onuma Inc., will be presenting in Japan at 10 a.m. Tokyo time, which is 9 p.m. Eastern. So it's a very odd time, but he's going to be showing more about AI, asset management, and digital twins. And it'll be recorded, so we'll have information about that also. So tons of excellent content coming up. Thank you for this great content today. And again, thanks to the audience for your engagement. Bye for all, and thanks to Nick for coming in and helping out with the technology.
Thank you, Nick. Thanks, Mike. Bye all.
Bye, everyone.